Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. Hang on. Let me just bring up the chat. I think we're live. Yeah. Cool. All right. Okay. Sorry about that. Cool. So I have the chat ready. The mic sounds weird. All right. Hang on a second. All right. Can you hear me better now? Robot mic. We had that issue last time. 1 second. All right. Is that better? Something again? Nope. Still glitching? Anyone? I don't know why that is. We had the same issue last time, but not entirely sure why. Everything seems to be all right. It's okay now? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, audio. Sounds good? Okay, cool. All right, let me just make a note because I will forget what I did or the settings that I tweaked. Cool. All right, so everything good to go? It's fine? Cool. All right, so let me just set everything up in here. And I got a new webcam, so hopefully you guys can hear all right. Oh, see all right. So it's just a little improvement to the video quality. It's the new webcam. Alrighty, cool. So welcome everybody. Sorry about the delay. Today's yeah, it's been a bit of a hassle trying to get this working. So a couple of things just before we get started. The challenge, kind of like what some other streamers, I've seen some of the work that Michael Pavlovich, for example, did for the Pixologic channel. There is kind of like a challenge going on how to approach the sculpting, but thinking about a subtraction, like a subtractive process rather than additive, which is mostly what everyone does. So what I mean by that is like try to carve into the 3D object. So I'm going to take on that challenge as well, and hopefully giving you some techniques and some things that might be useful for you. Like, I'm going to try a few different things as well. I'm not entirely sure if they're going to work, but hey, that's probably why we're here, right? Like, just to try a few things and see what works and what doesn't, and I can share a little bit of the process as well. So that's let me just also bring in this work. So this is something that I did a while back, years ago, 6 years ago actually, so a long time ago, and it's basically the same idea of what we were going to be doing today, in terms of carving out things or subtracting mesh rather than adding. So it's kind of like an elephant in a bottle. This is the ZBrush sculpt, and there's a little time lapse showing how I sort of like defined the whole thing and carved into the rock, into the 3D rock. So this type of sculpture, there's a lot of editing afterwards, and refining the the wrinkles and certain folds. But overall, the idea was to approach this sculpting in a more kind of like traditional way, and that's hopefully what we can do today. And I'm going to show you a few different techniques that I think are pretty cool. So I thought we'd just do something fun today, and I found these photos of this cat in a box that I think they're really cool. Let me just bring them up. Right, so look at that. So this could be like a really interesting sort of work to do around these cats. I don't know why, but I think this cat is the same in just different poses. Looks like it. But anyway, the whole idea is I find cats hilarious in and how they go into like bottles and small spaces like boxes and stuff like that. So we could do something like this to carve it out, and try to make it kind of like a cat in a box, or cat in a square box or something like that, or in a square bottle, just to keep on with the challenge. So that's roughly what we're going to be doing. But I do, even though this is kind of like a silly thing and it's just for fun, I could share with you some techniques that hopefully you can apply to something a little bit more interesting than the cat. But yeah, that's roughly what this session is going to be like. And there was another thing. Oh yeah, okay, cool. So the first approach, I mean, we can go ahead and take this. Let's go with the damp center brush. And if we were to create that sort of cat, in fact, let's just start from a cube and make it a Dynamesh. Right? So this is just a normal Dynamesh cube. If we were to do that sort of thing, that cat, in fact, what I'll do is I'm gonna put it in here so you guys can see it. I don't have the chat enabled, but it's all right. I have it. I mean, it is enabled, but you guys cannot see it. So if there's any questions, I'll just read it out loud and try to answer it. So feel free to put any questions in the chat. This is kind of like the main one. Cool. So if we had, if we have to approach this in a sort of like subtractive manner, there's a few different ways to approach it. But my instinct would be to try to find the main volumes. So let's say that leg over there, I will just, the smaller brush size, maybe increase the resolution a bit more. I would do something like this, right? So that's the leg there, maybe something around there. Then the face of the cat in here, the eyes, and there's another, oh, this is the tail. And there's another leg in there. And then you have the body there, and then you have this, the hand here, and that is, the rest is just fluff. Right? So that would be like my first approach. But this is kind of like approaching sculpture in a more painterly like 2D approach, because obviously this is just from the front. We're not considering anything else, right? That is on the other sides, which is kind of like the point. So once I do that, again, this is not the technique that I'm going to show you. It's just trying to give you my thinking process, if anything, and how I approach it. So I could take something like this, like the mask lasso, and I would start pushing things. So looking at this image, I would say the points that are kind of closer to the camera would be this hand, or this paw, and the leg, perhaps. In fact, let's just go ahead and do, let's just paint it out. So let's go for a red color, or yeah, let's go for a red color. Fill it up. And then I'm gonna use so red color would be anything that is receding. Usually it would be easy to understand if it is just black and white, but just so that you guys can see what I'm doing, I'm just gonna use red and blue. So blue is closer to the camera, red is further away. So with blue, I would just basically paint this, right? These points maybe. So those ones are the ones closer to the camera. So once I have that sort of like established, at least in my head, I don't have to paint it. This is purely so that you can see what I'm doing. I could go with the mask lasso and sort of isolate that part, or those areas, maybe blur things a little bit, and then just bring in the gizmo, and then start like pushing things out. Maybe let's mask some part of this, and maybe scale this down. Right, so scale that up, right, and then continue going that way. So the next sort of area that I find to be like closer to the camera, maybe a gradient, if anything, around here as well. Maybe you can start see a little bit of the tail, that sort of thing. And you can do this as well, like with the mask pen. So you can mask this area, and then start like going a little bit lower to this leg, more of this paw, bit of the tail, maybe blur things a little bit. Let's mask out this area, and this is obviously using the Dynamesh technique, and that's it. So bit by bit, so you can see roughly how this is started to become, but it's not necessarily carving things out, like if you were sculpting, which is what I wanted to do, or how I want to approach this. So this technique is, I would say, is like closer to what's argued or believed, which I don't know if it's like there's no concrete evidence of how Michelangelo used to carve his marble pieces, and how he used to approach the sculpting process. It's like it's been a mystery for centuries. But there is I forgot his name, Barsali. Let me just find it out. So there's a historian that was a friend of his, Giorgio Barsari, I think. Barsari, I don't know. It's something like that. Oh, yes. Yes, I remember. Cool. So I think Giorgio Barsari documented some of what he believed was the process of Michelangelo for that carving process. So I'm gonna try to replicate this obviously in ZBrush in a way that you sort of like see how it was done, although there's no real evidence. And I'll show you something else. So I'm sure you're familiar with the giants. They're slaves in the marble rock. So those are I think it's in the Florence Museum, or Academy of Florence, where the David is. So that should be, hang on, let's just call it the giants. Yeah, here we go. So these ones right here. So you have the Atlas, there's the young slave, all of these. This one is fantastic. Anyway, so I'm just gonna open this one to give you an idea. So these ones, I think they are in that hall leading up to the David, Michelangelo's David in I think it's the Academy of Florence. Sorry, I forgot those things. So if someone knows, maybe you can just let me know. But basically, if you look at these ones, this is why it's been such a mystery as to how he used to carve these things so perfectly and so amazingly. Because if you study these blocks of marble, the way that these things have been sort of carved out, or how he reached these sort of like really nice and smooth, like beautiful forms, it's not necessarily like a comfortable way to carve things out. Like if you look at this leg that is sort of starting to show, the right leg, like carving this area, you know, is really hard to understand why he did it or he approached it that way. Because it's like, if you were to do it, or if anyone were to do it again, it's kind of like an uncomfortable way to carve this out in a way. Anyway, it's fascinating to look into this. And so that's what it attracted me from the challenge of trying to carve things out in ZBrush. So anyway, the point is, if you look at all of these things, they're like unfinished pieces of the sculptures that Michelangelo did. And then, but if you look at it closely, they're like, it's like the sculptures are like the human figure is sort of like trying to get out of that that piece of rock just by carving certain things that you could see a little bit. Anyway, I find it like absolutely fascinating, and there's a lot of reference to that. But my point is that Giorgio Vasari did a documentation of how he believed, and that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like yes, the Uffizi Gallery. Thank you, side effects. That's where they are. So, and by the way, I think there is a virtual tour in somewhere. You can just Google it. There's a virtual tour where you can actually go and, in a virtual tour, visit the museum. So the point is that Giorgio Vasari did and I apologize if it's not the real thing. So I'm just going by memory. I think he was the one that documented like the potential way of how Michelangelo approached the sculpting process. And it was super interesting because what he did was, or what he's believed to have done is, he had like a model of maybe, I don't know, clay or something like that, of what he wanted to do. So he had a maquette, something smaller, and he used to submerge it into a tank of water. And basically there was some kind of mechanism where he would drain the water, and then the first part that would appear in the water, that's the first area that he would carve into the rock. So it was like a block of marble, and then the water would drain, really revealing some parts of it. So essentially, let me just give you a better idea of what this is. Let's just make that into a cube, and we're gonna get into the sculpting process, but I think this is kind of like a cool thing to think about, and if you were not aware about this technique, it's just a really cool thing to to research. So let me do a QMesh. All right, and I'm gonna duplicate that, make it a Q cube. And then I'm gonna append as, I don't know, this is Spiral 3D. All right, so roughly that process that I was describing, it's basically, hang on, this okay, so basically, if I were to sculpt this and carve it out, I would do, or if I were to follow that method that is believed to be used by Michelangelo's in sculpture, I would do a maquette of this. So like a clay, or I don't know, wood or whatever, something simpler, like a smaller version of it, like this. And this is what I'm going to sculpt. I would put it into a tank. So imagine this is the tank of water, and this is the water. All right, let's just give it a white color or a blue color. All right, so this is the water, this is the tank, right? And this thing fits within the tank itself, right? Then what I would start doing is I would take the water and start draining that water, like little by little, until the first part of the sculpture is revealed, like that, right? So the water will go away and that model stays there. So now I can look at this, and this is another one of like the mysteries as well from that process, which is super interesting, because if you look at certain sculptures, especially those giants in the Uffizi gallery from Michelangelo, you could see that sometimes the carving starts almost like a painter, so it's like a front view. It's not considering a lot of the surroundings areas, at least at that stage where they sort of it's like the beginning of the sculpture, of the carving, and that's why this method sort of like resonates with a few scholars, I suppose, as to that, you know, this was the right method. So you start sculpting this or carving everything out until you reveal that little piece, and once you have that portion, then you can move, you know, drain more water, and then it reveal more, and so on and so forth. So it's just all the way until it's kind of like a 3D printing, right? How it works, like an inverted 3D printing or something like the Formlabs too, and that's how that process would come live. So you carve bit by bit. So let's say if you leave that sculpture to that point, that's what, you know, it will show. That's kind of like an unfinished piece, right? But you'll see like the actual model or the, you know, the anatomy or whatever sort of going out of the carved block of marble. Anyway, so hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's super interesting. I would recommend to have a look at that and read about it. It's super cool. Awesome side effects. Thank you. I'm not able to freeze subdivision level. I'm showing mesh as layer. Cancel. Sorry, I'm not entirely sure what that means. Do you have any custom shells? John is asking. Sorry, I'm not sure. Is this what you mean? Like this? Oh, that reminds me of something actually. Sorry guys, but I'm like reading at the comments and the questions, and they're a little bit too specific, and for, you know, for something that I'm not working on. So like issues with trying to make a branch with thorns in them. So I'm trying to make hook. Yeah, so that's probably not the. Let me just think about it. Really long and sharp. I would say that the best way to do a thorn or a branch with thorn is with the C-spheres, and then just insert the thorns. That's what I would do. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started with the sculpting. Just to give you an idea of how I would approach this, or like let's try to see if I can do anything with it, with this cat. Obviously, this is not what I'm going to do, so let's just don't do that. Let's just redynamize that. In fact, let's go back to the block of the. So the other cool thing that you can do with ZBrush is do kind of like a reverse engineering. Sorry, a reverse engineering of what an image would look like in ZBrush. So it's kind of like doing the same thing that I just showed you, like with the tank, or like that virtual tank of water. But by bringing the cat again, we can sort of like dissect it of what is closer to the camera and all of that, and create kind of like a black and white image that would serve as a reference precisely to just figure out that sort of process of, you know, replicating that water tank technique, right? So I went to Photoshop. Here's the cat. Actually, let's put that away. So here's the cat, and out of this image, I manually created kind of like a depth map for the cat. Just exactly the same thing that I show you in ZBrush. It's just a lot easier to do it in Photoshop, and I'll just walk you through it like very quickly. But then I could export this as a JPEG, bring it into ZBrush, and it will give me not a perfect example of the cat, but something very close in terms of the depth that I can use to sort of like hide areas or kind of like start putting that water, that virtual water down, and see what parts I need to focus on to carve the rest out, right? So that's kind of like the idea, and we can use a bunch of different techniques that I'm going to show you later on. So I don't know what at the end we're going to end up with is something worth doing anything with, but you know, enjoy the journey, I guess, and the techniques that I'm going to show you. So if you take something like this, right, and again, it's just a matter of figuring out a little bit of the volumes, and let's see, let's create a new layer here. So this first part would be just Photoshop, but you know, you can do the same thing with any software, I suppose. Affinity is pretty good, and let's use something with a high contrast. That should be okay. All right, or maybe not. There we go. No. I'm gonna make this a bit darker so that it's easy to see. Okay, I'll do it with white. Right, so the first thing that I would do with any image that you want to use this process with, so you know, it doesn't have to be this cat, it's to identify like the main volume. So obviously you have the square shape, there's no need to define that because that's what it is. But then you have, let's say, this blob in here, then you have another blob there, and another one there, and then you have the main sort of shape. So then you have obviously the tail, and on the leg, the paw, and I would for the face of the cat, I would sort of like simplify it a bit more. So I could have this part, and the eyes, right? So this is kind of like an ideal process to sort of identify the big shapes. And if you want to recreate this in 3D without the technique of like carving things out, without the challenge, you could just basically block it out like this, right? This one as well. Right, so you identify the pieces, and this is the process that I teach in the 5-day challenge, like that little weird creature. Some of you guys might have seen it or might have done it. It's that idea of like decomposing or reverse engineering an image that you see or something that you want to recreate, and super simplifying with geometric shapes, and being able to recreate or at least come to something very close based on the most simplest basic geometrical shape like spheres and, you know, cubes and cylinders. So this is kind of like the first step to identify those big areas. Whoops, I sort of painted on top of the cat. Hang on. Oop, that's not the one. Let's do it again. So now I have this cat. The next step would be to just create a black image, just a black layer, and I would put it into color as a blending mode. You can also desaturate the image, but you know, so if you desaturate the image, you kind of like lose the color. So this is just a simple way to desaturate, or use a layer like this, an adjusting layer, and just let's actually do that. I'm gonna delete that. So you can just use the hue saturation to get to this point. And then you can start by adding a new layer and make it black. So this is gonna be like the base. So whatever is further from the camera in ZBrush. And this is what is kind of like tricky to think about when you're doing a 2D image, but thinking about it in a 3D space. I'm just gonna lower the opacity so that I can see a bit of the cat, and then create a new layer. And this is how I would approach this. So thinking about those major shapes that I draw before, I'm gonna start looking at whatever is I think is closer to the camera, right? And I'm gonna use a lasso, right? something like that. And I'm gonna find those pieces. So I think this area, and I'm not gonna do the perfect shape like that. It's gonna be, because obviously this has volume, so there's gonna be an area that is closer to the camera from that entire shape than the rest. So I can start with maybe what I think is even closer, and I can be as detailed as I want to. Something like this, right? And I'm gonna fill that with white. So this area is gonna be closer to the camera. So you can see what I'm trying to achieve is kind of like a depth map from ZBrush. Then I'm gonna do another layer, put it underneath, and I'm gonna leave those ones as they are, and then just sort of continue that sort of process. And again, this is gonna be super rough. You can be as detailed as you want to, but I think this is just good enough. And I'm going to add a white color underneath, but I'm gonna bring in the hue saturation values, which is Control U in Photoshop, and then just make it a bit darker. Not a lot darker, just a tiny bit. So now you can see that even though there's no gradient, there is a clear distinction between the widest point, or the wider areas, which is the highest point in the depth map, and the next sort of like layer. So I'm just thinking as a 3D printer, kind of like layering things out from the top to the bottom. I'll do another layer, put it at the bottom, and continue finding, maybe we can already see a little bit of this, and maybe a little bit of that one as well. So the next sort of layer in this 2D printing process is to see a little bit of the next level, maybe a little bit of the tail as well, right? Fill it with white, bring in the hue saturation, and I'm always gonna go one value closer to black. That's the next one. One more. I'm just gonna do one more just to give you the full sort of spectrum of this workflow. And let's just add a bit more. Maybe you can see this already. A bit of the fluff here coming through. More of the tail, more of this leg as well, and maybe a tiny bit of the nose. Right? So literally what I'm doing is thinking in, like, if I could see the cat in a box from the side, what is the next layer? So I'm just like draining that virtual bucket of water, if that makes sense. I don't know if these analogies are any good, but or making more confusing, but yeah. Right, so I have those things like that, and I could continue going all the way down until I get to black. And you can make as many layers as you want to. The more layers and the more values, the more gradual that, the softer and the more gradual the changes in volume would be in ZBrush. So this is the one that I came up with, and I'll show you the layers. So these are the layers. Let's put that there. So you could cut the cat into pieces. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, like, it wouldn't change much for the workflow, I think, or it wouldn't add much, I think, to the workflow. But yeah, but if you kind of like think about cutting the cat in pieces, that sounds evil, but cutting it into, or thinking about cutting it into layers from the top to bottom, yes, absolutely, but not into like the main volumes. The main volumes is just to try to identify where the highest point is. So I went ahead and did this bit. So this is, oh, let's go from the bottom. So from the top. So that's the main area of the cat, right? Then I went for the next area, and this one, and this one, and this one, and then I added some for the eyes and this bit of the, yeah, and let's set this to normal. So this is roughly, you know, you can sort of see a bit of the depth in the cat in there, even though this is just like blobs of color, but that's what allows you to transform something a little bit more realistic or more accurate to approach the carving process in ZBrush. So once you have this, what I did, I'll duplicate that entire folder and I merged it down. So now I have this image, and what I want to do is try to create a sense of like like a softer transition between the shapes. So you can blur things a little bit. For instance, go to filter. You can blur this with Gaussian blur. And then you can use something like this smudge brush, right? And I don't know which one I have. Just a soft round brush, nothing crazy. And with this, that's what I would use to sort of soften the transition. I would start doing this, right? And that creates a nice gradient from, let's say, yeah, the wide area, so the highest points in the image to the ones at the bottom, right? And this process, I'm doing this like a little bit faster because this is purely a reference. This is not like creating an alpha that we're gonna click and drag and create the cat, right? This is just a reference to do that process of the bucket, but in 3D, so we can have it as a reference and start carving and sculpting. Hopefully it makes sense. But yeah, I'm gonna finish this one just so that you can see what I can export. But the point here is to try to avoid any harsh transition, because this is a very organic shape anyway. So that's what I'm doing this. So for instance, this area right here, this kind of like darker line, that's going to be a carving, or that's going to be carved out into the model, right? So another thing you can do after you do that sort of basic approach to finding the figure is, let's say, create another layer, make it a black layer, and reduce the opacity a bit. So now there is no like a pure white color. So there's still room to add more to the volume. So you can add another layer, bring in a soft brush just to paint like this. And let's use a pure white color. So now I can refine that volume a bit more. So I can add to this. So these are the highest points now. And then I can use, the color picker in Photoshop to refine this even further. Just paint a bit more of the grayish. Maybe I want to soften the edges so that it sort of, it feels more like it's a rounded volume around here. So it's not a pure white. But this is just using like I said, the values that are already in that image to refine the volumes a bit. Maybe the face needs a bit of refining as well. So it's not necessarily painting it is kind of like painting a depth mask or a depth pass. But what I'm doing really is just refining those transitions of values, so that when we move it into ZBrush, it kind of like makes more sense for ZBrush to read this as a full volume. And the next step is just super simple. So all right. So hopefully this makes sense. Of course, there's going to be areas that need a lot of refinement in 3D, but now you can sort of see this cat, right? In a close to a 3D version of it, which is cool. So once you have this in Photoshop, you can save as a JPEG. Let's just put it in the desktop. Let's call it cat test. Right, now let's go back to ZBrush and let's begin the process of sculpting this and or using it as a reference. So what I'll do is I'm gonna bring in the alpha palette here to the right. By the way, guys, I don't know how many of you here are actually in my email list, my newsletter, but I sent one this morning, early this morning for me, about a new tutorial in my YouTube channel. So if you go to, I don't know if you've seen it, but let's see. All right, I'll put this in the chat so that you know what I'm talking about. Because a lot of the times that I do these sessions online, I get questions about my UI. So I did a full-on tutorial on how to customize it, and I'll share my UI as well. Cool. So if you go to my YouTube channel, so it's this one right here, creating a custom UI in ZBrush. So I walk you through the entire process of building your own custom UI, or like what are the steps that I would take to create something that works for you. And I also shared in the, if you go to the comments as well of the video, or not the comments, sorry, the description in here, you can click on this in this link, and you will download the UI that I have. So just leave it there for in case you want it. So that's basically the UI that I have, minus the macros that you wouldn't have anyway. But yeah, so that's an interesting way to approach, or in the video I'll explain an interesting way to approach the custom UI. So if you're interested in the current UI that I have, you can follow along with that to create your own, and I explain how to do, you know, custom palettes like I have in here. I create one with you guys in the video. So yeah, so if you haven't received the email, maybe check that you're in my email list. It's free to join, and I share tips and tricks every week, and obviously news and stuff like that. So feel free to join there. You can go to the 3D Concept Artist website, and there's a subscribe tab in there. You can just subscribe from there. But yeah, and you know, if you want to, I also appreciate the help with with growing the YouTube channel, which is the next sort of phase for me to sort of like produce more content in a way. And so if you subscribe and share, that would be awesome, and you will know when I add a new project or a new tutorial. So in the alpha palette, going back to what we're doing, I will load the cat test. So now I have this alpha, because it's a black and white image. That's how ZBrush would read the information. Anything that is pure black is most transparent, or is really further away from the camera. Anything that is white is closer to the camera. So now we have this alpha, and I can use, you know, the standard brush, for instance. Let's just reset that, change the alpha to the cat, and change the stroke to drag rect. I'm going to increase the resolution of this quite a bit. Maybe that's too much, but it doesn't matter. And I'm going to click and drag to create that cat, right? Obviously, we can increase the intensity, and you sort of see a little bit of what's happening in there, right? It's a bit noisy, but you kind of tell what the cat is, right? So what I'll do, I mean, this is one way to do it, right? Just to drag it up like that. The way that I would prefer to use this as a reference, again, this is not the sculpture, this is purely as a reference. I would go to the alpha palette, and you have these two mesh. So we have the cat selected. I'm going to click on to mesh, and that would create a plane that would extrude only those areas. So basically now what we have is what we did in Photoshop, exactly the same thing. Again, a bit noisy just because of the artifacts of the JPEG and all of that, but if it was a better image, it wouldn't come across like that. So you have the white points that we established around there, and then you have the dark points, or like the pure black around it. So whatever is pure black, that's what ZBrush ignores, and the rest of the gray, the grayish values are all around, right? So now what we have is a 3D version of that cat, so that we sort of have an idea of how to carve this. And I'm going to scale it. It's maybe too strong. Something like this, maybe a bit more. Yep. And yeah, and then we can just polish everything a bit more with the polish slider. And that's it. I mean, it looks horrible. Like I said, this is not necessarily for sculpting, but it's a great reference. So if you can decompose, or not decompose, sorry, deconstruct an image into this, then it could serve as a great reference in ZBrush. So now what I can do is let's append a cube, or it could be a plane. It doesn't matter. And let's say that this is my water tank. Right? If we go back to sort of that idea that I mentioned about Michelangelo sculpting technique. So you have this tank. Let's make it a blue as well. And I'm going to start moving things down until the first bit is revealed. Right? So it is the same thing that we did in Photoshop. So we identified the top area, so the areas that are closer to the camera, and that is what we sort of added with or painted white, and so on and so forth. But now in ZBrush, once we have that reference, you can have that sort of water tank, maybe a bit more than that, right? And for that process of carving, this would serve the purpose. So I'm going to put this in here, and this is my first reference. I'm going to hold Shift and S. So that's my reference there, and I'm going to go to a cube, like so, make it a Polymesh 3D, and let's make it a Dynamesh. So I think it's all right in terms of what Dynamesh is. And then we can now take the clay brush, and using that as a reference, right? If you use this as a reference, I basically need to hold the Alt key or change this from add to sub. So whenever I do this, I'm actually carving things out. So what I can do, and again, this is why it's such an interesting technique, approaching sculpting from almost like a 2D front painterly like perspective. So I'm gonna lock in the camera, and I'm gonna start like doing this, right? And whenever I hit that area that I wanna preserve, that's kind of like what I'm going to ignore. So I am carving things. Right? And this is a single stroke. So if I undo that, I will lose all of that. But if I don't do it in a single stroke, every time that I release the point or the mouse or the pen and I go back again, it's just going to add more of that depth. But that's so far what I need to do or to achieve is this. So let's just do that. Another thing you can do, there's many ways again in ZBrush to do the same thing. So one thing you can do once you do the first part is to mask an area like this. So let's say mask that, and that just sort of masks things out around. What I would think would work, again, this is something that I haven't tried, but what I think would work really nice would be to use the thick skin, so that you have a control way of pushing things without going too far. Like I said, if you keep doing this over and over and over with the same, with new strokes, what you're doing is carving a lot more, right? And we need to do this kind of like in a controlled fashion. And again, this is not my workflow to sculpt anything in ZBrush, but it's kind of like the challenge that I'm taking of only using the C sub or like carving things out. So I'm not adding any volume. That's the challenge really, just for fun. Like it's not a process that I would use for a production or anything, because it's just a little bit slower. But it is a really interesting thing if you were to do something in like real life, like carving it. And I just think it's a cool challenge. So That's what I'm doing it. So if you go to the thick skin, let's hope that this works. What I'll do is maybe rotate things around. I'm gonna click on thick skin, and you can go into the negative values. So you can push this, say like that. I think you can go negative -5. Apparently not. I thought you could go. Interesting. 20 is the default. So yeah, there we go. It doesn't work the way that I thought could go. Oh no, actually, it does work. Hang on, I'm just confused. So the thick skin, what it does is create that sort of virtual skin, but you can actually push things in if you use the C sub. So it does work. Sorry. So let's set it to 30. 30 should be a good number. Yeah, 30 should be fine. So what I did there, just in case you're not familiar with this feature, if this is the cube, like the actual cube that we have, the actual geometry, the thick skin, what it does is creates a virtual thickness of like an inflate of the mesh. So just by moving that slider, ZBrush is creating, let's say, 30, a value of 30, and then create a virtual cube around it. It's not as thick, but just for illustration purposes. So now I have this gap that is a virtual thick skin, and if I use the C sub, I actually can push that in. So with, sorry, let's go back. With the C sub, I can actually push things in to the same 30 points value that I established here, but inwards. So that allows me to control how far I can go, and it doesn't matter how many strokes that I use. This is going to be the limit or the cap for ZBrush. So that means that I can lock my camera in. Now they have this thick skin. Again, this works because I have C sub. So the slider, and this is what I sort of got confused for a second, the thickness is only positive values, so you can only go from 0.0001 to I don't know, 1,000. I'm going to 30. So you can go in only positive values, but if you change the C add to C sub, you can actually push things in, which is what we're doing, right? So now I can push this as much as I want to with many strokes, and I would only be able to see, or I cannot push things all the way in. Right, and I can obviously change my brush size and have a bit more of a careful approach to this. All right, and maybe increase a tiny bit the resolution and redynamesh everything. Cool. As soon as you redynamesh, you lose the thick skin, so be careful about that. Cause I mean, you don't lose it. It's just ZBrush wouldn't have to recalculate it again, so you just need to enable it again. So yeah. So that's about it. So now I can go back, and this is why it's a bit of a tedious process. But you can do multiple stages of the process. Maybe I can do that. Yeah, let's do that. So I'm gonna clear. Again, I'm testing a few things in here, so sorry if I'm like all over the place. But basically, we have the first one. Let's take this water tank and push it a bit further now. Right? Let's put this in here. Hopefully you guys can see this properly. All right. Shift S to dock that in there, and let's just move that further so. I'm gonna do kind of like the steps here. Shift S, so that I don't have to go back and forward and do this multiple times. And that's why I told you at the beginning, this is just purely a reference. Shift S. Cool. Lock the camera. Let me just see the chat. See if there's any questions about this. Good way to create terrain with animal shapes. Yeah, could be an interesting way. Sculpting. Fair enough. Please, jewelry tutorials. I don't do any jewelry. I mean, I haven't done much. If you wanna check someone really good in terms of like jewelry design and the process of, with a lot of knowledge in terms of the jewelry space, check out Thomas Whittleback. He's a ZBrush live presenter as well. Also Nacho Riesco as well. So there's heaps of artists or ZBrush artists dedicated to jewelry in that space. I'm not necessarily one of those, so I wouldn't be able to give you much insight into it. All right, so let's do the same thing again. Thick skin, 30, and now I'm gonna start defining. We could also, if it is easier, we can define kind of like the next areas that I need to cover. So something like this, maybe a little bit here, something like that, and I think here's the other leg, and you can start to see a bit of the tail there, and another leg in here. Right, so just with the damp standard brush, you will be able to carve out the things that you have to protect in a way. Go back to clay, and it could be any brush really. In fact, if you want to be a bit faster, you can use the clay builder brush, again with C sub. So you can carve out very quickly, but you still have that cap, so you cannot go further than what you allowed with the thick skin. So hopefully this is going to end up looking sort of alright. And I'm afraid we're going to have to, this is just a test. We might have to do, incorporate a few other techniques and tools to make this look a bit better. But again, that's part of the process, I suppose. We can polish things a bit. And redynamic, we lose the thick skin, so let's turn that on again. And now we can start moving towards this third one, the third part of it. Now the problem now that I'm facing is that this is still, I'm just doing this based on a single angle, so I don't have a good sense of what the depth of this should be. And that's what I'm saying. We'll do, I just wanted to show you the technique, so we do a little bit of that, and then I suppose we'll go back to the usual sculpting techniques to get this guy out of that uncomfortable box. And we can use the damp standard to refine some areas. I'm starting to lose a bit of the shapes. And what I'll do is I'm gonna define a bit of the face in here, so that I don't lose track of where it is, roughly. All right, and I'm gonna bring in the move brush because I think this leg is way too low now. And turn off the thick skin. All right, so I'm kind of like there in a way. This looks horrible again. Let's redynamesh, but let's clear all of that. And now, if I look at it from the angle, and this is why it's so hard, right? It's kind of like a flat, like a relief thing. Like there's no real depth, and that's why it's kind of like a complicated way to approach it. So I'm gonna try to improve this a little bit more by taking my clay. Let's take the clay brush. And now I can start pushing things from, looking at things from different angles. But again, this approach is kind of like it's not necessarily an intuitive way to sculpt, at least not in a traditional sense from in ZBrush. I suppose in more traditional way, like in marble and stone, whatever, that would be the way to go. But anyway, some interesting techniques to think about. But at least I have this reference that I can start polishing. I'm gonna try to round this area a lot more. And I feel like we're gonna have to end up like pushing things a lot more. Because now it doesn't look like a cat, like a cat at all. But I'm trying to get the major forms first, which is ultimately what I would do in a more traditional or streamlined sculpting workflow. Make sure that the volumes are right. So I'm looking at like larger forms, I guess, larger pieces. I think the face could be a bit more sunken. Same thing with this. So all that process that I showed you before, that's kind of like an interesting, fun thing to try. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the simplest way to work, but when the only tools I have are subtracting, a little bit of planning like that goes a long way. But I don't think you're ever gonna find like I don't know, a job or something that that you would get a brief saying you have to do this, but you can only use the carving tools to create something like that. I don't think that's ever gonna be the case, and I cannot think about any weird scenario where that would be a requirement. So yeah, it's just something for fun, and it could be an interesting exercise as well to sort of practice your sense of depth, I guess, and yeah, just a fun experiment, I suppose. All right, so I lost a little bit of what the cat should look like now, so I'm gonna bring in as a reference here and drop it in there. Francisco, although your work. Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you like my work. Where am I from? I was born in Colombia. I'm now in Australia. So yeah, I've been in Australia for a few years now, and um, I'm teaching at the moment. I do have. If you go to the 3dconceptartist.com, or even in the ZBrush guides, you will find the links to the different courses and things that I have online. So I have a few projects, or just go to pablander.com. It just shows you what all of the projects that I'm involved with. I'll put it in the chat. That's kind of like my hub now. So if you go to Pablander, it shows the different projects that I'm part of. So I'm gonna carve here that leg. And I'm gonna start pushing things a lot further now. But I have to be careful. I don't want to overdo it, otherwise I'll have to come back and add volume. Redynamesh. I think most of the face needs to be sunk in a little bit more. And I'm gonna define here the tail. Maybe it goes all the way here. So now I'm starting to get a little bit into the 3Dness of this cube a bit more. How many polygon? You can see the active points here, 155,000 on the right hand side. It's not much. Certainly not enough to describe details yet. So I'm not too worried about that. I very rarely pay attention to that number during this stage. So I'm gonna give this a bit more roundness now. And this honestly just becomes a kind of like again, I always mention this word, but like therapeutic in a way, because it's more of the same. Once you establish the main shapes, the main volumes, it becomes quite easy to just relax and step back and put some music down and work on this block. There's no a lot of design, I suppose, to do once you have established the main shapes. A lot of refinement though, but I'm gonna bring this closer now. Make this cut a little bit more rounded, but I do want to keep a little bit of that sort of squarish format so that I can fit it within a box. And I'm gonna redynamesh all of that. All of these that I'm doing should have been done with less resolution probably in the Dynamesh, but it's alright. Waiting for a close simulation, right? And it's so relaxing watching the sculpting get for real. No worries. Okay, so again, this process could just take a while because I keep looking at different angles and thinking, well, this something else needs to be added here or needs to be refined. You know, and I can start now taking, which is something that you wouldn't do with, you know, a block of rock. And that's why, even though there is a method to the whole thing, that's why Michelangelo and all the real masters are masters. They're so amazing because they make it look easier. But so this is something that you wouldn't be able to do with that sort of thing, which is just rotate and move things around. But we're in ZBrush, so we can do that. So what I'll do now is, just so that it doesn't become so repetitive and, you know, doing the same thing over and over, instead of just carving things out, because you already can tell there's something there. There's some shapes. Still not a cat, but, you know, something there. So what I'll do is I'm gonna switch to, you know, the normal sculpting now that I have the bases carved in. So I can, if I want to, let's use that one. I can start refining this a lot better and think about the volumes a bit more. So I'm gonna use the clay brushes to round up this paw, this leg, and I'm gonna carve out the actual length or depth of that. Same thing for this, just rounding things up. And I'm going to use a custom brush based on the clay builder brush that just has a different alpha and some, or maybe it's the same alpha, I can't remember, and some tweaks. And let's go ahead and define the face, because I feel like that's the area that is lacking a lot now. I'm going to use the damp standard brush to kind of like mark the face a bit, just so that I get the right areas, I suppose, to carve in. Roughly. 232 resolution, just a tiny bit more. I think just to be able to refine the face a lot better, what I can do also, Just notice this is way too big and way too thick. I think what I was saying is I think I need to bring in a couple of spheres just to have the reference of the roundness of the eyes, so that I can a lot easier approach the sculpting of the face a lot easier. All right. It's getting there. All right. And I haven't sculpted a cut, so I don't know much about the process. This whole session was the idea to show you different techniques, so we might not get into anything worth keeping or saving. All right, so there's the sphere. That's gonna be the eye of the cut. Let's place that in there. And I'm gonna hold Control and click and drag to place this guy on the other side, the one that is sort of like squished by the leg. Right. Oops. Let's push it forward to add a bit of rotation there. Okay, so now I can start adjusting that a lot easier now that I have the reference of the eyes. So with them standard brush, I can, again, this is just a quick way to define the eyelids, for example. So you'll see the eyes kind of like squashed by this leg and this leg. So I'm gonna hold the Alt key and sort of bring that like so, and then just push that in like that. And this one, on the other hand, is kind of like almost wide open. But even at this point, you'll see, even though I need a lot more resolution now to describe certain areas, I try to keep everything very low because this is still very, very rough in terms of the volumes. There's a lot of things that need to be tweaked, I think. But just, you know, bit by bit. And obviously, like I said, in a more traditional way of sculpting, or a more traditional approach of sculpting, at least in ZBrush, I would have this split into a bunch of different subtools, for example, so that I can control more the overlapping of this leg over the eye. Because right now this is quite hard to manipulate, and just still keep it with the shape that I want. But hey, I guess that's the challenge, right? in this area, this looks more like a leg than the tail, so I need to round this up a little bit more. All right. The face still looks very weird and flat. And I haven't been working with perspective. Alrighty. We're getting closer to something that looks like a cat. I don't know. Let's see if there's any questions. Hang on a second. I'm waiting for a closing. It's like a copy of Blender's tool. Oh, sure. Your intensity is affected by the pressure of the pen. Yes. So the C intensity right now with this brush is set at 20, but I can press harder or not with the pen, and it's obviously adding or subtracting. Otherwise, it would be way too hard to approach this. Cool. Thanks, man. Glad you like my work. What is the name of this software? This is ZBrush. Does ZBrush provide any dedicated workflow for CAD modeling? This is the dedicated workflow for CAD modeling if you want to follow along. Cool. All right. So yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be tweaked with this guy. But we're getting there. In fact, this one it's a lot more work. This area right here. This goes like in like that. And also there's a bunch of fur, which we can add as well later in a second. How we're doing with time? All right, we have about half an hour to sort of polish this cut a little bit more so it doesn't look as bad. But hey, just a sculpt, a practice or a test. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And that's just another way that I personally find certain tools and workflows that, just using the features and the ZBrush tools in different ways. That's how I find like new workflows, or sometimes I realize, well, this is cool, but there's no way I can use this in a real work environment. It just takes too long. It's really fun, but it doesn't work for me. All right. I'm gonna use the H polish, and that's just gonna be a simple way to define some planes so that I can focus on, understand where the kind of like the flat areas of these poles are. It doesn't matter if I override this, just so that it's just defining the planes. Really, that's all there is. All right, so for these things, what I'll do is just do something like that and define them very quickly with the damp standard brush again. In fact, let's just push everything. Because I think this is the one that is more evident in the reference anyway. And I'm going to increase the resolution quite a bit. And again, another reason I wouldn't necessarily follow this process or this workflow for something a bit more polished is that because I need to increase the resolution to be able to define these things, then I would end up with a lot of more resolution, obviously, but then that's going to be a lot harder to control the volumes and the big forms of the sort of primary shapes, which at the moment they're not necessarily well defined. So that could be an issue. I'll try to be a little bit faster here. And in fact, what I'll do is bring in this custom brush, the knife brush. This is a brush that I built for myself as it's kind of like my alternative brush to the damp standard brush. It's just a lot stronger and gives a bit more control based on the pressure in terms of the depth that it produces, and it's part of the clay buildup. The clay pack. So you can just, if you're interested, you can find that in the ZBrush Guides website as well. So you see, it's just a lot stronger, and it just pushes things a lot more. Or a lot faster. And I think this is way too low now. Just looking at the reference. But again, it's ZBrush, so it's just all of these things are fairly simple to change. I'm going to redefine the face again. And something just here to separate the tail a bit more from the face. We still have a bit of time to refine this a bit further. If you guys have any question in the chat, feel free to put it in there. I'll have a look at that in just a second. I'm making this up now because obviously I don't have a reference in my image that I'm using as a reference to do this. So hopefully somewhat close. I think the main challenge for this, or the main challenge for this technique is to be able to maintain that sort of 3D-ness, or that roundness of all the volumes. This one looks horrible, but I have to inflate to close that gap. This has been a rather relaxing session. I don't know how much you guys would have taken from the techniques that I share, but it's been fun. I'm gonna redo this. It's not working for me. I'm gonna start with the volumes first, or the main areas, rather than the other way around, which was adding details and then figure out the rest. I think that's a bit better. Let's refine that one as well. So at the end of the day, I didn't do much. I mean, we sort of like established the main things with the carving tools, or carving out this whole CAD, but ultimately the process of adding, it's just a lot easier. See if I can try. I want to try to replicate that sort of expression of the cat, which is the cool one. Oh, the cool thing about this. By the way, let's just so that we can wrap it up with something cool as well. We have 20 minutes. Yeah, so let me just keep refining this a bit. It's gonna be a sketchy. It's not gonna be able. I'm not gonna be able to polish this anyway. I mean, to a degree that I can be sort of relatively happy with, but yeah, I just want to show you something else that is quite cool, and you can go ahead and download it from the ZBrush guides. All right, let's do a bit of work here around the face. That's really what needs more work, really. From everything else, you can sort of tell that it's a cat, but the face still looks weird to me. Is the forehead that is we're sort of like missing a bit of volume here. Let me see the chat. Hey Mauricio, thank you so much. I'm glad you like the work and the tips. My pleasure. How is my day so far? It's ZBrush infused and cat infused, so it's not too bad. Thanks for asking. Do you have any recommendation for those getting into sculpting who don't have experience with graphic tablets? Would you recommend starting with a mouse? Or do you have any recommendation how best to get used to a tablet and ZBrush at once? I would definitely recommend a tablet 100%. I've said this before. I'm very biased as to what tablet I would suggest. So, yeah. So I would go for a Wacom tablet, to be honest. But that's just me. There's other really good tablets. I think X Pen is. I mean, I haven't tried them, to be honest. I've tried some of them really, but not the latest ones that I would recommend or anything like that. So, yeah. All I'm saying is that I would definitely recommend you going for a tablet. Definitely, definitely, definitely. It doesn't have to be a Cintiq or a super incredibly costly tablet. Something that is, as long as it is a tablet, I think it would work. I don't know many other brands other than X Pen. Yeah, other than Wacom, and that's the one that I would recommend just because I've been with Wacom for years, and that's the one that for me are more reliable, and it's just I feel like for me as a tool is what I need. I cannot go back really. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm biased in that sense. But if you find another brand that suits you, I would 100% recommend a tablet. Don't even think about a mouse. So any tablet, doesn't have to be a Wacom, but a tablet definitely. That would be my recommendation. And in terms of where to get started with the tablet and how to use it, I think it becomes a very intuitive thing once you open it up, open ZBrush, and take a sphere and start doing what I'm doing really, just adding and subtracting volume. I don't know if there is like if I had a transition between 2D and 3D. So before I was doing anything 3D related, I used to do 2D illustrations and Photoshop stuff. Coral Painter was big at the time when I don't know if it still is, but yeah. So I use a tablet for that, and I sort of like got used to the fact that I needed to use a pen to produce those pieces. So when I started using ZBrush and more like sculpting in 3D, the transition for me was quite simple in terms of using the tablet. So I don't know if there's anything that I could recommend that could be related to what you're asking. So sorry about that. All right, I think we just need some tweaks here for this, but overall I think you get the idea that this is a cat, although it's not perfect, but yeah, you get the idea. And it's not perfectly accurate as or like close to the reference, but close enough. All right, so in the last just 10 few minutes that I have, I want to show you something else that is pretty cool. Just gonna refine this quickly. All right, lots more work, but at least we have a reference that there's a leg there coming out from all the fur. All right, so what I was going to suggest, actually, this is the thing. I just keep, every time that I go further and check it out, I see things that need to be tweaked and changed, but we need to wrap it up. So yeah, so what I was going to say is if you go to the ZBrush Guides website, I'm going to go to my brush palette. Is my reference image pure ref? Yes, it is pure ref. Cool. So if I go to my brushes, I'll show you the hair brushes. So these are brushes. It's a pack of brushes to sculpt hair. It allows you to sculpt hair like quickly and fur and all of that. So if you go to the ZBrush Guide's website, or if you go directly to my store where I have all of these things, you can go to pabloander.com and there's a link there as well. You can download this pack for free. It's a free pack, but it's quite cool for sculpting things like this. So I'm gonna show you maybe this stylized standard. So I do these things to maybe establish the main sets of hair. Let's just put this guy again as reference. Maybe this one has more contrast. But yeah, I'm using pure ref for this. So with this I can establish the main clumps of hair. Actually, let's do that so that I have the before and after as well. So I'm gonna just duplicate that and do it in here. So you can use this kind of like as a way to establish the flow of the fur, so the directionality of it. But there's a bunch of other ones that you can use. All right. Long hair standard. Let's go for control fur. This is the one that you probably want for this type of thing. So we probably need more resolution as well. So let's just do that. We're in 1 million, so 2 million. That's plenty of resolution. I do a larger brush size just to keep on with the style of this cat. And obviously you can tweak the intensity. And yeah, it's a cool way to add a bit of details to the sculpt. But yeah, all of this is in the ZBrush Guide's website, and it's a free pack. You can download it and play around with that. All right, I think again you get the idea. But now with a little bit of fur, that just, I don't know, if it feels more like a quick, I don't know, it could be like a bronze sculpt or something. No problem, man. My pleasure. Glad that you like it. We are nearly there. I'm just gonna add some random hair here at the back because you won't really see it, but so that it's not very evident that it's just like some clay brush strokes, just to hide the laziness of my work with this. Alrighty, I think we are done with the cat in a box. We just need to put it into a box and do a bit of tweaking. So I did have that reference. Let's put that out of the way. The reference here. I'm just gonna use that. Copy, paste. Cat in a box, and yeah, I can use maybe the move brush. For further adjusting that and make it really, really cramped in here for this cat. Just some minor adjustments to the whole thing, and there we go. A cat in a box. Yeah, so hopefully you guys found some of the techniques and ideas that I shared useful. But the rest, if you wanted to keep working on this cat, if I were to spend more time on this, I would definitely have to sort of like step back a little bit and redo a lot of things based on focusing on the volumes, just to make sure they're right. Especially if you want to look at this from a different angle, it might not be, this doesn't feel right. So yeah, those are the type of things that I would look into adjusting. Mainly the volumes or the main shapes. That's what I would be more worried about if I want to refine this. But at this stage, with that amount of resolution, it's not going to be like an easy thing. So I will have to go back and fix a few things. But this is a good challenge and a good practice. So hopefully you have enjoyed at least the sculpting process. No worries. I'm glad you like the brushes. What program would you recommend to pose characters in ZBrush? ZBrush really is what I would use to pose. It depends on what you want, but you can export it to Blender and just do a quick skin and rig it in a way, or pose it there, or you can use Character Creator 3 if you're using a humanoid mesh. There is there's a tutorial that I'm planning on just specifically to cover different techniques and my favorite method to pose things in ZBrush, and a few tips and tricks as well that I think you could find interesting. So keep an eye on the YouTube channel. Again, if you haven't subscribed yet, you can go ahead and do that and you'll get notified. I also send my email list. If you're part of the email list, you'll get notified first as well, as soon as something is up. But yeah, that's about it, really for today. I'm gonna keep like refining this a bit more before I share it. Cool. Awesome. No worries. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Also, for anyone that is interested in the Extra Mile, the online course that I have online, that's going to be opening hopefully, I'm hoping the end of this month or early June. So if you're interested, again, just be part, as long as you're part of the email list or you have registered your interest in the course itself, I'll let you know when it's up and running again for the enrollment. All right, guys, I'll leave it here. And again, remember that there is a new tutorial on how to customize your UI, and I share my UI in that tutorial. So if you go to the YouTube channel, this one here, the latest tutorial, the creating custom brush UI, you just go here and click on this. It will open up like a Google Drive thing, and you just download the UI. Yeah, and that's about it for today, guys. Have a good one, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.